So to prosecute clients, I'm glad New Zealand didn't follow that track, and as far as I know, our men are still a part of society and not filling up the courts. So other important issues that, of course, need to be expressed. It's an offence to induce or compel a sex worker to provide or continue to provide commercial sexual services or claim any earnings derived from sex work. So sex workers have the right of refusal to provide commercial sexual services, and I think we all know that that's a standard law. Everyone's got the right to say no. But we felt it was quite important to stick in there because occasionally when you are a sex worker, people have this attitude, oh, you're a sex worker, so, you should put up and shut up. Well, that's not exactly sex work. That's coercion, and that's inducing and compelling. So we felt it was important to be explicit in our legislation to state yet again that sex workers have the ultimate right to say no to sex, as do the clients. So what happens when we don't get on with our boss? Well, what can happen typically is he owes me money, and he's saying that I was late to work. She's been using my money and I haven't been paid out. So these are typical kinds of complaints we get. I wanted to have Sunday off. I was made to come in. I didn't want to work. I told them a week in advance, and I shouldn't have to because I'm an independent contractor, isn't that right? So the turf gets a little bit muddied around employment versus principal contractor versus independent contractor. And what we do, we work with sex workers and we narrow down the critical concern. It could be that part of that concern relates to inducing and compelling, and you can go to the police and lodge a complaint. It could be that you mostly just want your money and you want to simplify it down to he owes me the money, and so you file a dispute in the disputes tribunal, and that takes about 5 weeks and it costs $35, and there's a hearing. It's very non-threatening, and usually the sex worker wins because usually the brothel operator has been unfair, but they're learning, and over the 11 years I think certainly one operator in particular, and I had to sign a confidentiality contract, so I tell everyone, who was head up for sexual harassment, and I sat across the table as this was going down in an employment-mediated hearing, a very formal hearing, but not the highest level by any means, but just an easily accessible mediated hearing. And the sex worker spoke about her feelings of being sexually harassed and how she felt. And she was really livid. She didn't expect to be sexually harassed at her work by her boss. And so a cheque was written and there was an agreement. There was a bit of argy-bargy and discussion and so on. Another case, which made international headlines, went another route. So that was one route. It was into an employment-mediated hearing. The other route was through the Human Rights Tribunal Review Tribunal, where a sex worker said, look, I come to work, he speaks to me in a way that I don't like, and he shouldn't speak to me like this. And, she didn't have the language of sexual harassment. She just knew it was wrong, that she had the right to work in a brothel, to be treated respectfully by the brothel operator. And that case was quite long-winded. It involved the review tribunal, the Human Rights Review Tribunal, having a court hearing, having 3 justices sit on it. She gave evidence, a brothel operator gave evidence, I gave evidence because she'd come to see me about her distress. And the review tribunal took 2 years to come to its decision, but ruled in her favour and awarded her $25,000 in damages. And so that was the outcome. It was protracted, but it was the same mechanism that anyone else would use in any other labour arena if they were under those circumstances. And it felt like an incredible victory, because in the old days, the brothel operator would have been charged with brothel keeping, which isn't what she wanted. She said, I like working there. Apart from him, he's a pig. I don't like him and the way he speaks to me, and he needs to stop. So the decriminalisation gives you more nuances and ways to deal with exploitation. And this is what I really don't understand about the anti-crowd, who really feel that there's only one way, and that's to eliminate and stop, and stop demand, and that solves everything. Well, I think this legislative frame actually gives us far more scope to deal with the very real concerns people talk about in respect to exploitation. I want to also say, and I'm not sure how I'm going for time, but I imagine I've taken up quite a lot, that the relationships with the police are so much better. They had to improve, and certainly there was a bit of sulking from some of the police who had been opposed. The hierarchy, of course, always gets it, it seems to us, that certainly there's more space for reflection on different legislative models, but sometimes the front line people could really get a bee in their bonnet, and not to say that they're not always, not to say that they're not sensitive sometimes, certainly, but in our experience we found that the relationships in terms of decriminalisation have improved out of sight with the police. And they appreciate that. And certainly we've had some great milestones. Recently we had another one of those headlines where a sex worker was complaining to the beat policeman about the client who hadn't paid her. And we've had a few of these cases, but this was captured by the media. And the police, she rang the police, which is amazing, like for street-based sex workers to ring the police directly and say, look, the bugger won't pay. And the policeman had said, put me on speakerphone, and told the client. And I think he was made to drive home, because it was that story, I didn't have my wallet. And I shouldn't really call him a client, because he had no intention of paying, so they're not clients really. They're people that don't have any business been with sex workers, but on this occasion he didn't get away with it. He was made to go home and get his money and bring it back, or he was going to be charged with extortion. So that is a massive. So that's a massive change. And we've also had corrupt officers brought to account, and I don't imagine for a minute Canadian police officers have an ounce of corruption. But we have a few of those Aussie migrants, and the bad cop story where the sex worker who was working on the street was being stood over, and he would lose her traffic fines if she gave him oral sex, that kind of thing. And she spoke up. She felt she could, and the police moved so quickly on a prosecution. So, those kinds of dynamics are really, really important to not just in this narrow neck, but also in the wider way that cultures evolve in relation to corruption. I had some wonderful pictures. You'll just have to imagine them. So I've touched on anti-trafficking, of course, and how decriminalisation raises expectations among sex workers and clients and creates a culture of whistleblowing. If it's suspected something is wrong, if it doesn't look right, people look for a solution, and the person to fix it must surely exist. Immigration, I must say, are very proactive and, in our opinion, too proactive. We don't have all sex workers who are decriminalised. We have a population of migrant sex workers who are still very vulnerable, and their actions or their involvement in sex work are still illegal, and that does create difficulties. And I think that's quite a complex issue. We'd like to say that sex workers should be able to migrate. They should be able to work in the country of their choice in the same way that other occupational groups can. But ironically, this piece in our legislation was put in there by the Minister of Immigration as an anti-trafficking measure, and all it's achieved is to make those sex workers who are working illegally, mostly coming in from countries like from Southeast Asian countries, all it's done is to render them into quite a vulnerable position. Although the sex workers who are working in decriminalised brothels and who work alongside of them are able to support them, and we encourage that support. I think I'm coming to the end, but I do want to labour a bit more, because I hear all these things said about New Zealand by people out here who speak against decriminalisation. I hear it said that we've had more youth. That's lies. I hear it said that we've got more brothels, we've got more sex workers. Also not proven. We've done a lot of research. I sat on a government-appointed committee for 5 years, and that was built into the legislation, that there be a review of the legislation after 5 years. At the time, we weren't happy about that being built into the legislation, but I think retrospectively it was a very useful thing, because we could examine and talk to some of those misperceptions and the mischief making that was coming up from the naysayers, or the antis as you call them. So if anything, what is coming out of New Zealand from that crowd are more lies. In particular, they say things that Māori, our Indigenous people, have not benefited at all from decriminalised sex work. Of course, they conflate a lot of issues, as if decriminalisation is meant to cure all the ills, that have ever been delivered in terms of colonisation, in terms of poverty, etc. But Māori sex workers were often targeted. So, as a minimum, we can say confidently to not be arrested and prosecuted and convicted in court is a huge gain. To feel that you are a part of society and not being shouldered out, that your actions are illegal. The Māori Women's Welfare League said this at the time the law changed: the introduction of this legislation to decriminalise prostitution will allow sex workers to have the same rights as workers involved in any other industries. This will improve their working conditions and encourage them to attain quality health care. It will also act as a strong deterrent to those who would exploit children through prostitution. For these reasons, the League supports the decriminalisation of prostitution. So just to recap there, sex workers who are Māori in New Zealand are no longer arrested or targeted for sex work-related activities. There is means of legal redress if work conditions in brothels are unfair, and can manage their own sex work and can work independently. And I think some of the trends that come up, numbers of sex workers in brothels go up and down, the same as before decriminalisation. More sex workers manage their own sex work by themselves or with one or two others. Sex workers are more aware of their rights, and there is an expectation that things should be working well from sex workers, clients and the general public, and that leads to improvements. And you can't see this, unfortunately, but it's a slide of us on the slut walk, and we're saying, hey ho, let's go, our right to say yes, our right to say no. And I think that's a very important right, and I thank you for hosting me here tonight.
afternoon, Chair.
Yeah.